While PSG are desperately looking to hold on to their European title and win another Champions League this season, there is a somewhat unlikely contender in Ligue 1 who are pushing them all the way for the league title, and that is, of course, Lens. And to talk more about that on this week's show, I'm delighted to have Ronan Karof back on the show. He's our area manager for France, and he was actually at their recent game against Stade Brest on Friday, which was, of course, a 3-3 draw. Ronald, great to have you back on the show, and how was the match?
Hi, Stefan. I'm glad to be back. And yes, indeed, it was a great game. Lens was led 3-0 at halftime, and they managed a really great comeback to at least save 1 point. Maybe it's getting too far, PSG now in front of them, but it still shows a great spirit from that team. So there is a lot to talk about them, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Even if they could only finish second,
Yeah.
that's still a huge achievement. And actually, there's three players in particular we wanted to touch on because they have been flying up the leaderboard, if you will, in Ligue 1 in terms of which players have gained the most market value. So I'm going to try and go through them one by one. I'm going to start at the back and work my way forward. And we're going to start in goals with Robin Risser. I did ask you before we started recording about pronunciations, but as a Scotsman, I will butcher French names in particular, so please interrupt me if I do. But really interesting goalkeeper here, Rono, because he was signed from Strasbourg for €3 million at the start of the season. His market value has increased by 23.5 million this season to €25 million. Ninth in Ligue 1 amongst all players for the biggest market value increases. First among all goalkeepers for the biggest market value increases. And perhaps the most interesting thing, particularly for Premier League fans or Chelsea fans listening to this week's show, is that he leaves Strasbourg, who are, of course, the sister club of Chelsea. Chelsea desperately looking for goalkeepers. They've let him go, and what's happened is Mike Penders, who stayed at Strasbourg, is second to him in terms of market value increases this year. Penders has apparently done okay, market value increased by €10 million, but the player they let go and go to Lens has more or less overshadowed him this season. And as far as I can tell from the market values, has been one of the best goalkeepers this season in Ligue 1.
Yes, indeed. I think it's quite frustrating for the fans in Strasbourg. It's because he was one of the biggest prospects in the academy for the past few years. He got two consecutive loans in Dijon and then Red Star near Paris. And he got to show his ability in slightly smaller clubs. But then last summer we see Petrovic go back to Chelsea and then be sold. So the window was open to get better chances as possible number one for Strasbourg, but they went for one of another Chelsea's assets, Mike Penders. So that opened the window for a transfer that wasn't even expensive, like 3 million, even if it's a decent prospect. He didn't have that much pro games yet. So that was like a really good bargain for Lens, even if it's also kind of a bet because he didn't have any Liga experience as a starter. But we quickly saw that his potential was well analyzed and overall a quite good fit for Lens, who needed to rebuild a lot of their team after a quite frustrating 24-25 season. So it was not that much of a surprise to see him live to the hype in a way, but to reach this type of heights from going for, like you said, from 1.5 million market value when he joined Lens to right now 25 million, and some talks about possibly going to the World Cup with France because there is a bit of, say, turmoil in French national team for goalkeepers, as we see Lucas Chevalier struggle with PSG and a few other players knocking on the door of the team to possibly get a chance for this biggest stage. So I think it's probably one of the biggest revelations of French football overall, actually, for a player like Risser. But I think also he will get quite a big transfer topic for the next summer because, like you said, Chelsea could have an eye on him if they decide to get a fresh start in the goalkeeper department. And we also saw some rumors for other Premier League clubs. We have Brighton, there is Newcastle also, who got some inquiries on Risser. So I think it will be quite a huge topic in this summer. And for him or a few other Lens players, I think it will just be a matter of if he prefers to aim directly to a bigger stage, bigger club, or try to play the Champions League, because Lens is almost secure, I would say, for second place now. So that will be a direct qualification for Champions League, and that would be quite a good scene to play on and make sure that this great season from Lens wasn't just a one and done situation, that they can really build on it for 26-27.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting twist of fate or even irony if he did end up at Chelsea next season after everything that's happened at Strasbourg. As you said, potentially going to the World Cup with France, depending on who Didier Deschamps picks for his squad. And even if he doesn't go to the World Cup, as you said, potentially playing in the Champions League next season or earning a big move in the summer. So either way we look at it, Rono, it seems as though his market value is only going to increase in 2026.
I think that will be the logic, yeah, because for now, of course, the market value in the first update of the season will take good note of the performances and how the team evolves overall. But now when we will reach the last update of the season, it's time for great overall of things and seeing that this player could now reach the Champions League scene, and we'll see depending on what is the call for the national team with France. There could be some more reasons to get one further increase. So it's and at least see where we stand also in like the more global goalkeeper hierarchy worldwide, because I think with 25 million, he's starting to probably knock on the door of the top 10 or something like that. So we'll see how we can evolve in the next year, because he's still quite young, 21. He will get 22 near the end of the year. So he has a lot in front of him still.
Yeah, absolutely. He's obviously the second most valuable player at Lens. And as you said, I just quickly checking there, he's currently 13th in the world for most valuable goalkeepers, about 20 million euros less than Donnarumma, who is our most valuable player, between the sticks on Transfermarkt. But moving on to some other players at Lens who are doing very well. And one player who's maybe helped Risser this season in more than one occasion is, of course, Samson Baidoo, who is the 22-year-old central defender that Lens signed from Salzburg for another extremely small fee, Rono, 8 million euros. His market value has increased by 17 million euros to 25 million euros, his current market value. Much like Risser, he's also among the biggest market value growers or players who've gained the most market value this season. He's 15th amongst all players in Ligue 1, but only two central defenders in the French top flight have gained more market value than him this season. We're talking about a player here, Rona, who's came from Austria, and as far as I can tell, who's settled into Ligue 1 very, very well.
Yes, a bit like Risser, it's kind of a bargain, even if in 8 million doesn't seem like bargain, but in type of modern football fees, it's still quite a great pick from a really promising team. Like we always know the type of talents that Red Bull Salzburg can build. So he really adapted quite fast to Liga indeed. Like the defense of Lens is one of their main assets this season with Risser and Baidoo and a few others that really build the stability and solidity of this team. And of course, he had a bit of more known potential, like 8 million in the Austrian first division. Is still quite a nice statement for young players, but of course now we know that he can evolve on a bigger scene. Even if his 2026 year has been a bit more difficult because he had a few hamstring issues, and actually he was starting to train again with Lens, but the medical department of the team told the coach that he would need to back off of playing actual games for a few more weeks in fear of some relapses. So he just started playing in a few last couple of weeks. So he maybe lost a bit of momentum compared to some teammates, but I think the overall view of his 25-26 season is still promising enough and rewarding enough to see him get this type of upgrades through the season, and I'm sure attract some foreign highs also, I suppose, in Premier League. But I was checking the rumors that were linked to his name. We also had teams like Inter Milan, Juventus, Borussia Dortmund who had highs on him also. So it's really big names of the European scene who could have interest in Baidoo, but also, like Risser, it's still recent signings. They both have contracts until 2030. So if they have to go this summer, Lens will not back down for bargaining fees. They will probably go for, I don't know, 30, 40 million euros limit to try to negotiate and not sell them for less than their worth in a way.
Yeah, I would suspect Dortmund are well aware of him since they're no strangers to picking up players from Salzburg. Famously picked up a young striker by the name of Erling Haaland. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of him. I don't know how he's doing these days, but he did very well at Dortmund. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I was just checking there as well. Inter Milan, Juventus, Borussia Dortmund on the rumour mill, and intriguingly Manchester City and Liverpool as well. Liverpool, of course, already have a very exciting young Ligue 1 defender heading to the club this summer. But do you think, as you mentioned there, he has had his injury concerns. This is his first season in French football, but there's a prospect of playing Champions League next season, or he could potentially move on to Serie A, Premier League, Bundesliga. Do you think he's ready to already make the next step, or would you prefer to see him stay at Lens next season?
Mm, I would say maybe compared to a few others of main Lens assets, I think this is a type of player that would probably benefit for this confirmation season that would be 26-27 by staying in Lens and probably be one of the main players of the team in the biggest competition. But of course, we know how the market is, and Lens has often attracted a few big names around them, like we saw in past seasons, players like Kusanov or Kevin Danso, another Austrian central defender, go for Premier League clubs. So depending on what would be best for the player in quotation marks and what the market will dictate, I think it will be tough to judge. But I think for his development, it's a type of player that will quite benefit for a fuller season. Again in Ligue 1 and with now European competitions on the horizon to build up even more. Like it's because if we look at his profile, for example, he didn't make any appearance. He only made one appearances, and it was 2 years ago with the Austrian national team. So he's not even too much on the radar for this team, for example. So he still has some aspects to build up to get even more exposure and be more recognized in the scene.
Absolutely. Maybe still a work in progress for sure at Lens. Final player on our list, last but certainly not least, is Mamadou Sangaré, the central midfielder. Another new signing, Rono, some outstanding, possibly the best transfer window in all French football, it would seem, considering they picked up these three players. They signed him for Rapid Vienna for €8 million before the season started. And his market value has risen by €24 million, to €30 million. And he's arguably been the biggest star at Lens based on market value increases. He's eighth in Ligue 1 for the highest market value rises since the start of the season. Intriguingly, Rono, the third highest among all central midfielders, and only two central midfielders in Ligue 1 have picked up more market value this season, and that is Neves and Mayulu at PSG. Am I okay to say that outside of PSG, he's perhaps been the most impressive central midfielder in Ligue 1 this season?
Yeah, I think that's the right thing to say. Like when we see this type of rises to be like on par with players of PSG who get much more margin to progress in terms of value, I think it's a testimony to how much the player has achieved. I won't say a similar situation as Baidoo, but like he joined from an Austrian team for 8 million, I think it was the same fee, and he adapted quite well, quite fast also to the team. Like directly became like a main asset in the midfield of the team. He contributed to goals, like as a central midfielder. It's quite a great stat to have like 3 goals, 4 assists, and it being in some recent games, like even last Friday against Brest, he contributed 1 assist. In the past months, he contributed also 2 goals and 1 assist. So he's been reliable, and not just in building play, but also being more forward in some games. So it's really quite a promising and exciting players to follow. He's been an international for the Mali national team also, like he's been in the previous AFCON when they reached quarterfinals. So he really progressed this season to show how he's worth and the potential he has. And compared to the 2 players we mentioned before, I think if Lens had to set selling price beforehand to each of these players, I think it would be the one of the 3 that will get the biggest price tag to start with, probably aiming close for maybe 50 million, something like that, because he's probably attracting mainly Premier League teams again. But yeah, I think even before joining Lens, he had attracted a few other teams, even a bit bigger than Lens, because Lens didn't have European competitions to attract them, but he still joined them, and now it's making it worth their money. And probably some clubs will now regret to not have spent only 8 millions a few months ago, and now having to pay the bigger fee to Lens to make it work. But and a bit like Risser and Baidoo, it's the same situation. Contract until 2030. So really, it won't be it will be a hard fight to try to sign him this summer if some clubs want to aim for Mamadou Sangaré.
Yeah, absolutely. Since he joined Lens, he's been linked with a move to Manchester United, Tottenham, West Ham, and Chelsea. And as we discussed the last time you were on the podcast, Premier League clubs are obviously very happy to depart with their cash when it comes to Ligue 1 talents. So we'll be really interested to see what happens to Sangaré this summer. But before we let you go, Rono, I have to ask, the kind of theme with all three of these players, of course, is that they are new signings. And for anyone who maybe doesn't follow French football, is this typical of Lens to be very good at identifying and scouting young players in the transfer window? Or is this just something new and exactly why they've been able to kind of project themselves towards a potential title challenge in Ligue 1? Is it, I'm not sure what the French expression would be, but a flash in the pan, or is it just a kind of one-off example, or is this typical of Lens to be very good at signing and scouting young players?
I would say yes and no, because we've seen in the past they reached Champions League a few seasons ago, and they had built quite promising teams with players from, I would say, smaller fees, who then went on for bigger prospect. I would name guys like Kevin Danso. There is also Lois Openda, who is a great striker, or they got back in France Brice Samba, players like that who really managed to bring the team forward, and coming from rather smaller fees and exiting on bigger fees. But last season, they changed a bit everything in their, both in coaching department, with the exit of Franck Hez, who has since coached Nice and now Rennes. And they had gone for a Spanish sporting director who brought a bunch of new assets, and again, not really expensive players, but it didn't work out for much of these players who already left last summer. So this time it was only like a one and done, because the team didn't qualify again for European competitions. And so they changed coach again. It was Will still last season, and they went for Pierre Sage, who had been really promising with Lyon a few months before. And it really clicked this season with Pierre Sage and the players that have been brought by the new sporting director, which name is Jean-Louis Leca, who is a former Ligue 1 goalkeeper who has a lot of experience with this type of clubs. And so I think they again found a better formula to make things work, like signing promising players. We talk about Risser, Baidoo, Sangaré, but also bringing some more experienced one. We've seen Hudson Edouard, Florian Thauvin, who won the World Cup with France a few years ago, or player like Alan Saint-Maximin, who joined last winter. So it's really well thought, mixed of high and young prospects and more experienced players who really need to build their height back up or get one last exciting project, because in a way Lens is quite a historical team in France also. So it's a nice project to join, especially when they needed to rebuild like this season to a higher standard that they have known for the past previous seasons. So I think I hope for Lens that it becomes kind of the norm to spot young talents, mainly from abroad so far. Like we've got Sangaré, Baidoo, Kusanov a few seasons ago. Like not many European clubs would have gone for Uzbek central defender in the Belarus league and then sell him for more than 30 millions 1 year and a half later. So I think that they've got the good methods. Of course, the transfer market sometimes has its reasons that make things work or not, depending on a few little details. But I think they probably got one of the best systems for now in France, Lens. And I'm kind of looking forward to the next transfer window in the summer to see how much they're willing to sell from their current assets, or if they want to, I wouldn't say block them in the team, but see if some players will be willing to stay in the club to see how the team will evolve in Champions League scene and probably aim for one more podium next season, maybe, or if they will need again to scout the transfer market to get even more promising prospects.
Yeah, be very interesting. As you mentioned, Kusanov, a former player at Lens, doing very, very well in the Premier League. Perhaps a good sign of things to come if anyone does want to pick up any of these prospects for the Premier League next season. But Ronald, that's all the time we have. As always, it's a pleasure having you on the show. And if they can do the unexpected and win Ligue 1, then we'll definitely have to have you back on the show in the next couple of weeks. But for now, thank you so much, and I'll speak to you soon.
You're welcome.